Hello there, everyone. My name is Wes Osborn. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Library Consortium, and I'm here with my colleague today, Kalee.
Hi, I'm Kalee Burkett, also with the Central Library Consortium.
We're excited today to be talking with you about a new work management system that we've been using at the CLC for the past couple of months. So this will be your introduction to KanBan or KanBan. Either pronunciation is acceptable, but you will see there in the little graphic, yes, we KanBan or KanBan. KanBan would work better in there to fit with that Rosie Riveter motif that was there, but either pronunciation is fine. So I'm going to step you through some kind of introductory information about the system, and then I'll turn it over to Kalee a little bit later, and she'll be able to walk you through the boards and the things that we've done specifically within the CLC. So our outline will be talking about the CLC and our previous kind of work system that we used, why we selected KanBan as the work management system that we felt would work best for us, how you can get started with KanBan, and it will follow very similarly the process that we ourselves use to get started with KanBan. A little bit about CLC's KanBan boards and the software we use. That's where Kalee will let you know all of those details. The effects that we've seen since we've switched to using KanBan within the CLC, and then resources where you can find out more. Wanted to start and just let you know a little bit about the CLC, so it would help you understand if it was maybe a similar type of organization that you might be in, to see if this might be a good fit for your organization as well. CLC is a consortium of 17 public libraries. Those libraries have a lot of different service points, branches, pickup lockers, vending machines, all those things. Pre-pandemic, we were doing about 26 million annual circ of physical materials, around 1 million registered borrowers or customers or patrons. There's about 1,500 to 1,700 staff that use the systems that we support. And we support the Polaris ILS and the servers and infrastructure for that, along with managing Office 365, wide area networks for some of our member libraries and firewalls, and a variety of other database and service contracts that we manage. The CLC staff is 5 full-time employees, so you're talking with 40% of them here today. The 5 of us manage all of those items that we talked about earlier. Prior to KanBan, our workflow system was really that we had a help desk ticketing system that we used for member support. We had a yearly action plan with detailed initiatives each quarter. And within those 2 items and any new things that would come in during the year, the work kind of happened in a very unstructured fashion. There wasn't much of a real system to the way that we did work. It was explicit. We're going to talk about the fact that there was actually a system and process, but it wasn't explicit a little bit later. But if you were to have asked me 6 months ago, does CLC have a work management system? This is what I would have told you that we had: a help desk and an action plan. Externally, our stakeholders were fairly happy with that system that we had and the work that we were doing for them. So externally, everything really seemed pretty neat and orderly. And that's going to be an important item to discuss later on when we talk about why we chose KanBan. Because externally, from our stakeholder perspective, things seemed like they were going pretty well. Internally, though, things were a bit more chaotic. Internally, we had kind of the following stressors. We were uncertain day to day what to focus on next. And as an executive director, I felt like I was doing too much traffic management, or heaven forbid that terrible word, micromanaging of the work that was going on. There was really low levels of team collaboration on work items, and also stakeholder collaboration. So discussions with our stakeholders about the items that we were working on for them. We had a lot of starting and not a lot of finishing. At one point, I was doing an examination of our backlog and found that if we added no new work items, we just worked through the things that we already had committed to doing, we had about 2 years of committed work to finish. And we didn't really have clear policies about how we did the work, the decisions process that we went through as a team about how we did the work. So with these problems, why did we choose KanBan? There are several different management practices out there, and I think we the reasons we chose Kanban were really twofold, really two main reasons. One, which is really important, was that Kanban recognizes that you already have systems and processes in place, but they may not be visual and explicit or consistent, but that you do have those systems and policies in place. And again, from our standpoint, our stakeholders were fairly happy. So we didn't want to upset the apple cart with our stakeholders if there was if there were things that we were doing that they were really happy with. So we didn't want to break too much of what might have been happening from their perspective. The other reason we selected Kanban as our work management system was that Kanban really favors evolving current practices rather than blowing them up and starting over from scratch. The recognition here is that it's really hard for a team if you go in and you attempt to wholesale change everything that you are doing as a team. So Kanban really favors evolving current practices, and the understanding there is if you evolve practices, you've got a better chance of long-term success of sticking with those changes that you decide to make as a team. So if you've thought that you might have some similar stressors in your organization and that this might be a good approach for your organization, how would you get started with Kanban? Well, one of the key elements that I want to talk about is that it's best to really think about implementing Kanban at either an individual or team level. Ideally, implementing it at a team level is great. If you don't have a team, or you're a very small team of one, or you don't have power within your team to force a new work management system on them, then you may need to implement it at an individual level. What I would caution is that it's a little bit challenging to implement at an organizational level. So this works really well at an execution level. We have these things that we want to do, but maybe from a higher strategic perspective, figuring out the things that you want to do, it's a little bit more challenging to use Kanban in those ways. It's not impossible, but it's going to be outside of the scope of what we talk about today. What we'll talk about today is how you can use Kanban to really streamline repeatable work items that you have. So focus on an individual or team level on common repeatable work types that you have. I've got some examples to talk with you to help solidify what that might mean. So great idea might be building a Kanban board and system for your purchase requisition process. You purchase things on a regular basis, and the steps that those things take are very similar, and you'd like to make certain that that process was streamlined and you knew where all the work was happening. That's a good one to do a Kanban board for. What might not be as good to start with anyway is a Kanban system for your yearly budgeting process. You might want checklists and items like that for that process, but because you only do it once a year, it's probably not a great idea to spend a lot of time focusing on all of the details of that process to start with. Another idea might be if you have programming or events that you do within your library, maybe you want to build up a Kanban system for that quarterly or event programming process that you have. But would maybe not be as good of an idea as to build a Kanban system for your once a year staff and service day. Kanban can, once you have other systems in place, can free you up then to examine those things at some point. But initially, you'll probably get the most bang for your buck looking at your event programming that happens on a regular basis rather than the things that only happen once a year. What Kalee is going to talk with you a bit more about is where we started, and that was building a Kanban system for our user support or help desk process. We have new tickets that come in every day there. Whether or not we're even working those days, new tickets are coming in. So that's a good repeatable work item type that we can examine and determine are there ways that we can do better things with. Contrast that with the ILS upgrade process that you might have within your organization or we have in the CLC. It'd be great to have a checklist for that to make sure you don't forget to do things, but probably mapping that out as a whole system is probably not a great place to start. So hopefully you're seeing a pattern here. Focus on those things that you have work items that you happen again and again and again, and start gathering those up together. So once you've identified a good repeatable work item type to focus on, then start thinking about tracing the happy path for your process. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by happy path, but I think the super key element here is that to remember that Kanban starts with where you're at. So don't start this process thinking about, ooh, I really wish that we didn't have to do this step or we could do something else here. That's not the way Kanban works. You can evolve to improve those things, but start with where you're at. Start tracing the path with where you're at, not where you wished things would be, but where you're at today. So take those similar work items and start building the happy path. So this is the way you're going to do that. You're going to look at all of the related work items that you have related to these tasks that you're thinking about. So that might be tickets in your help desk system like we had, or emails, or other project boards, or other plans that you have that have information related to this, but you want all of those things. You want to attempt to gather all of those work items, each stage of where those work items are. And then create a summary for each work item on either a physical or virtual post-it note, whatever works best for your organization. So you've now got the work item as a summary, one sentence on a post-it note. Then look at describing for that current work item that you're holding or looking at, what is the current workflow stage for each of those items, or for the item that you're holding right now. So are you trying to get more information to determine what you need to do next with something? Have you been actively working on this? And if you have, what is that active work meant? Have you been drafting an email? Have you been working on a presentation? Have you been reviewing documentation from a vendor? What is the current stage for this particular work item? What is the current workflow stage for this work item? Once you've described what that current stage is, then think about what the stage was that happened just before the current stage. So what happened just before this work item is where it's at right now. And then in an ideal world, if everything went right with the current stage of this work item, what would be the next thing that would happen right after this current stage for the work item? So there's different stages that you discover through this process. You want to create columns for those. Again, on either a virtual or a physical whiteboard, create columns for all those different stages that you're discovering. And continue this workflow process for all the work items that you have that you're aware of related to these tasks that you've been looking at. And then group all of those work items under the columns and stages that you've discovered. A big important part for this, and something that we initially got a little bit hung up with, is that you're building a one-way path here. You're not building a flow chart. You're building the happy path of where a work item should start from and end from starting on the left and ending on the right. And it's a one-way process, not a flow chart. Now, obviously, let's be realistic. Not everything is going to travel that happy path, right? So what happens if an item happens to not be taking the happy path? Well, Kanban has a way of handling that as well. And in Kanban, the way that you indicate that something is not taking its happy path is that it's blocked at a current stage. So work items that aren't taking a happy path are blocked. One of the other key elements that, again, CLC got tripped up on a little bit initially is that blocks should really be external forces that are outside of your control, not internal delays. Not having enough capacity may be a reason that something is not getting done because you don't have enough time to do it, but there are other ways to address those types of problems that Kanban has that we'll talk about later, about related to internal capacity. Blockers should really be external forces that are not under your control. So things like waiting on others, you have a meeting that's scheduled, there's maybe a bug in a third-party software product. Those are all things that could be blocking something from moving along on its happy path. You want to get an indication of what all those blockers are, and I've put on this screenshot on the right what CLC's blockers are in our help desk area, so you can get an idea there of what they look like. And then you want to indicate any of your work items that are blocked because of these reasons. So when you're all said and done, you will have a Kanban board. And this is a nice kind of one screenshot summary of the entire process that we just discussed. gathering up all the different types of work items, defining the workflow steps, identifying the pain points, which includes blockers, but here they've also indicated some other things as an organization that they wanted to capture, executive flyby requests. So maybe it's helpful to know what the source of some of these requests is. So you may want to indicate that on some of your work items as well to help give you more statistics and information about them, and then lay out that information on the card, and then put those cards, those sticky notes on the board that you have listed there on step 5 on the right. The element, though, that I want to let you know, and this is one of the things that personally I didn't understand about Kanban, is that once you've done this process, you're not done with Kanban. There's an absolutely critical part of Kanban that you have to examine either as an individual or as a team next. And that's described a little bit here from this individual, Ono Taichi. He was the Japanese industrial engineer that's really considered the founder of the Toyota production system. And the Toyota production system inspired the lean manufacturing process in the US, which also then inspired Kanban, which is a Japanese term for signal card. One of the reasons we use Post-it notes, they're visual indicators, which is the term signal card is a visual Japanese word for that's a Japanese word for signal card, and that's what we're creating in the Kanban process, our visual indicators or signal cards. And this whole process is then influenced by Ono's 10 precepts. And one of his key ones out there is that you must place limits on the work that you have in progress. You see a little tagline or a website here, Limited WIP Society. WIP stands for work in progress. So there's a group of people that feel strongly enough about how important it is to place WIP limits. They've created a website in this kind of Obama-style poster of Ono Taichi here to kind of reinforce some of those concepts. But let's talk about why you should have WIP limits. And this is adapted from an article from Canvanize.com. And one of the things that they say that you need to have WIP limits is to ensure that you have a manageable number of active work items in progress. And if you don't have WIP limits, you're not doing Kanban. If all you've done is created a whiteboard with Post-it notes on there, there can be a lot of value into doing that, but you're not really doing Kanban unless you have WIP limits. And you want to have WIP limits so you don't switch either your individual or the team's focus throughout the day. If you do switch focus throughout the day, you're multitasking, and that really generates waste and inefficiency. And Kanban is trying to eliminate waste and inefficiency. So setting the maximum number of items that can be in any one particular stage, ensure that you only pull in new work items into the next stage when there is available capacity to do that. So if you're feeling a bit intimidated by WIP limits, don't worry. So were we at the CLC, and so I think is everybody. And here's 2 suggested approaches for how you might go about setting WIP limits. So if you look at your main in progress stage that you have, which may be 1 or 2 stages, one of the ways you can start is by looking at all of the number of work items that you have in that stage right now, based upon your previous exercise, and say that this is going to be my current WIP limit. I'm not going to allow myself to add any more things to this. Within the CLC, I think that was around 40. So when we initially laid out our items and looked at the items that we had in progress, we had about 40 work items in progress. Each week that you then talk about your process, or each time you review your process, and we'll talk about doing that a little bit later, try to lower the number of WIP items that you have in those stages until you get to a comfortable, predictable pace for incoming work and outgoing work. So continue to look at that throughout the process. Another thing that you could consider doing is taking the number of individual people you have on your team and multiplying it by 2. The idea there is that a person can really only be working on one thing at a time, but they might have another thing that they started working on and then it got blocked. So setting a WIP limit of 2 is an indicator that one of those items may be blocked, and so it can't be worked on until somebody gets back with you or returns a phone call or you have a meeting. But the other work item you can be working on. If you start to think about WIP limits, you may then start to think about, well, some of these work items might not be the same. So you could have a work item that says buy a brand new car and buy a pencil. Those are differently sized work items. Why would I set a WIP limit of 2 or 3 when the items are sized so differently? Well, we'll talk about the sizing of items a little bit later, but I would say that you still need to set the WIP limits, even if items are sized differently. In fact, you must, or you're not doing a Kanban system. One of the things that I really found a powerful quote about WIP limits is from David J. Anderson, who's the person that kind of really formalized the Kanban process. And this is from his book, Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Business. And he says that WIP limits create a tension in the workplace that forces you to discuss problems. If you have a WIP limit of 2 things that you're working on and somebody comes by and tries to add something else to your desk and it makes you go over a WIP limit, it forces you to have a discussion, either with your team or with that other individual to determine what's truly important and what needs to be done next. So WIP limits are super powerful for really forcing you as a team to make sure that you have collaboration, and they're vital. And as it was noted earlier, if you don't have WIP limits, you don't have a Kanban system. So take the WIP limits that you've decided you want to go with for each of your in-progress stages and add those to your board as well at the top. So again, it can be either the number of current items that you have in there, or you can use another method to try to find the WIP limits, but put what those limits are for each of those stages. Now, if what we've talked about so far seems like a lot of work and is not going to help you at all, but you still think there's some benefit to Kanban, what I would encourage you to think about is the possibility of creating a simplified Kanban board. All Kanban boards, in essence, kind of break down into these stages of things that are requested or your to-do items, things that are in progress, and then things that are done. So if you feel like you can't examine all of the stages, and actually Kalee will show you where within the CLC we're doing this a little bit later, at least break down into these main categories: requested or to do, in progress, and done. But key element, make certain that you have a WIP limit on the in progress column. So if you can't do the whole examination stage, at least put all of your work items into these columns and put a WIP limit on the in progress as a starting point for you. Once you have that board, then there are several other meeting cadences that you should consider. And these don't have to be new meetings. Again, Kanban is about using what you already have. And so if you already have regular meetings, add these Kanban steps to those regular meetings, evolve those regular meetings that you have. So the main things that you should be doing, that you should have a cadence for, daily, you should be making certain that all the work items are on the board. A key element of Kanban is making sure you visualize the work, and you can't visualize work that's not on the board. So make certain every day that you've got everything on the board. Then discuss any blocked items as a team and see if there are ways that you can unblock those items. So anything that's got a blocked item, talk about how you could unblock it or what needs to be done to unblock it. At the same time, when you're doing this review, it's really a key element to review the board from right to left, meaning review what's closest to being finished first and focus on finishing what you've started first, because that's going to then create additional capacity for you to pull in the other new items. And then regularly meet to adjust the board stages, the WIP limits, the board policies, and this is where we'll talk about those work items that aren't correctly sized, right? So you have a work item that is buy a new car that's been in your in progress for 3 months. What that is an indicator is that that task probably needs to be broken down into smaller steps. So at the same time, discuss how to break down some of these work in progress items that have been stuck for a very long time so that you can then move those through the system, get them moving through the system. And then you may also decide that it's a good idea to when you have additional capacity in your stages, rather than just pulling work into that stage, that as a team, you have what's called a replenishment meeting. So you can discuss as a team, what is the next new work that you should pull into this particular stage. One of the key elements here is really that step 3. Remember, Kanban is about evolutionary change. Change is good. So you want to experiment. You want to play around with different stages. You want to play around with different WIP limits. You want to see what works and doesn't work and keep trying things on a regular basis. And if you're a management person and you have a team that you're thinking about introducing this workflow to, I would really encourage you to think about having somebody else on your team run these meetings or rotate the responsibility for running these different meetings within your team. Kanban's one of its other principles is to encourage leadership at every level. And a kind of very easy way to get started with encouraging leadership at every level is having somebody else run these meetings within your organization. So another key point of the Kanban process. So what I'd like to do now is turn things over to Kalee to talk a little bit about our software. Now, you don't have to have software to use Kanban, but we have found that a good tool helps us focus not so much on the process and the Kanban system, and allows us just to focus on the things that we want to do with the work and not get distracted by the mechanics. So I'll turn it over to Kalee to talk about the product that we selected, and we'll talk a little bit about why we selected it, and then she'll show you some of our boards as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Kalee.
All right. So like Wes said, before I get into the nitty-gritty details of our Kanban boards, we'll go over some of the reasons why we picked the software that we did. And we ended up picking a software called Canvanize. And there's a lot of reasons that we liked Canvanize, but really the key points come down to its API integration, which allowed us to integrate into our existing help desk, which helped our process get started a lot. It also includes space for explicit board policies on the board. So if you ever have a question about what we've decided about a particular column, we can see the details right there. The customization of Canvanize is something that I personally find extremely valuable. You can make a board as simple or as complex as you need. It also has other aspects like personal dashboards and reporting for continued evolution. And this is something that we as an organization haven't started yet, but we will be heading in that direction eventually. Canvanize also has templates and automation rules to help make the process easier for kind of repeating tasks. And they also have monthly updates with new features, which we also find really valuable. So it's a tool that's continuing to evolve with us as we evolve in our Kanban process. All right.
While Kalee's getting that screen share set up, I will just point out that the other thing that I liked was that it was a tool that focused exclusively on Kanban. It wasn't bolted a to-do task that had some Kanban elements bolted on. So that was important to me because we feel that this is the right process for us. So I'll let Kalee show you now what it actually looks like.
Yep. So this is our help desk board. And this is the first board that we really ever made as a team. And you can see there's kind of like a few additional columns, but for the most part, it's just a pretty simple board with new tickets coming in, which is where our API hooks in. So someone submits a ticket to our help desk, and then 15 seconds later, we have a card pop up in this column. And then from there, it moves into this gathering requirements column if we need any more information. Or it goes straight to in progress and then done, depending on the complexness of the card. And that's for really simple cards like new user tickets. Other more complex cards will usually go through this, and then they'll sit in this on deck column until we have capacity in our in progress. And you can see we have our WIP limits here on both the in progress column and the fixed date column as well. So this is something that we found that we really needed for this help desk board was a fixed date column. So for a task that we could do at any point, but we couldn't actually complete it until a date, usually because a library requested a change at a specific time. So that's what that means here. We also actually have multiple swim lanes on this board. So we have this average swim lane, which is where most everything goes into. But then we also found we kind of needed this lower priority swim lane as well. So this is kind of for us anyway, larger, kind of more complex things, but tasks that also aren't nearly as important as some of our other things. So this allows us, by separating this out, to continue to work on kind of everyday things that come in, while also slowly making progress on these tasks that would otherwise just sit forever, more or less, because more important things continue to come in. But by breaking these apart and having separate WIP limits for them, it allows us to work on both at the same time. You can also see up here, we have these initiative cards, which, if you remember Wes talking about breaking out larger tasks into kind of smaller pieces, and that is exactly what these cards do in Canvanize. So these originally came in as tickets, and then this new branch example is a really good one, because that's a really big task. And if we just had that as a regular ticket, it would sit taking up space in our in progress column for probably 6 weeks or more. So breaking it out like this into smaller tasks that can be completed faster allows us to keep the cards moving and flowing through the various columns. As an example of kind of a more complex board, we also have our purchasing board. And you can see right away that this is just a little bit more complex. There's a lot of more columns, but they all have kind of a specific purpose. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. And this allows me to see like the purchase orders and the reoccurring and the one-time kind of purchases as they're going through, and have the information I need readily at hand for this board. You can see we have our board policies here as well. So this paid reoccurring invoice column is for invoices that occur multiple times per calendar year. And we have a policy that the card needs to be tagged with the frequency, and then they're moved to the ready to archive column at the end of the calendar year. Aside from that, there's not really much different about this board from our help desk board. It just has a little more complexness to it. However, our other CLC items board is probably the board where we really need to continue to make the most work. And this is because we felt when we first started, we had our help desk board and we had our other board, this board. And anything that wasn't a help desk ticket fell into this other CLC items board. And we're still slowly working on breaking these tasks out into their own kind of home, depending on what kind of tasks they are and where they fit. But you can just see almost at a glance, because there's so many things in here, our WIP limit is so much higher that we still have a lot of work to do before we get this board kind of into the same situation as the help desk board and the purchase order board. We just recently decided to make 3 new boards after looking at the cards we had on here and seeing and finding some commonalities between them. So it is just a continuous evolution that you really have to do. And we'll continue to make new boards, I think, and hopefully get this down. I'm a big fan of WIP limits, and 19 is definitely a little too high for a team of 5. So aside from that, Canvanize has a lot of other interesting features. Something we haven't gotten into much, but hopefully we will continue to use in the future is this customizable dashboard. So each person can make their own dashboard with different types of widgets and see the cards assigned to me, or like the blocked cards that are assigned to me. And you can really do almost anything that you can think of with these widgets. And one of the other really valuable things that we found and that I use a lot are these card templates. So in these card templates, so we have our governing council meeting every month, and we need to prepare our packet for the governing council. So I was able to set this up and have all of these subtasks and child cards already filled in here. Excuse me, so that when I go to our board and I can generate a card and make it be this exact card. And if you go in here, you can see this child card here is already assigned to me. So is this one, and you can really just break things out really easily. And these, in combination with some of the automation rules, really help a lot of that tediousness of like managing the cards and the boards. Yeah, I think that about covers it, Wes.
Yeah, great introduction. And Kalee is definitely our Canvanize guru. She's been with us for several years, but got started in a new full-time role. We were very excited about the same time we were doing the KanBan process, or kind of exactly the same time we were doing the KanBan process. I think our training was your first full day or something like that, wasn't it?
Not quite the first full day, but yeah, it was that next week, because I started on a Wednesday. So okay. It was my first week.
Yeah. And Kalee's just been invaluable in really taking it and understanding the software and adapting the software to the needs that we have within the organization. And I think we really like Canvanize, because I don't know that there's really anything that we've thrown at it that we found out it couldn't do.
Well, just continuous sorting on your columns is, I think, is it.
Now you did find the one. Hopefully they will add that in a future release. Kalee was saying you can sort the columns in the process, but it doesn't keep that sorting by default. So that is one thing we've talked with them a little bit about, particularly for that fixed date column thing. It would be helpful to have those sorted on a regular basis there. So at some point, hopefully they'll add that in. So that we won't have to do those pieces. But it's great because, as Kalee mentioned, that it's once a month or so we see updates from them.
Yeah, I've seen an update from them every month since we've had their product. So
they also were willing to do some training with us and follow-up training sessions as well. So that was another positive to working with them. They really feel like they want you to have success with the process.
Yeah, they use KanBan themselves, and when we did the training with them, like, we could see kind of like their process as well. So you can tell it's really important to them to have everyone have a good KanBan experience.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kalee, for showing us around Canvanize and around the ways that CLC does things. I'll flip back to talking about the impacts that we've seen of KanBan within the organization since we've introduced it. We've been using it just about 3 months now. I've got a few quotes here from the CLC staff. One of our staff members said it's like going from a 2D view of our work to a 3D view of the work. Somebody else mentioned to me that was on the team, I finally understand what the rest of the team is working on. This is somebody that's been with us for a long time. Relatively speaking. So it really opened them up to be able to see everything in one place. And somebody else said, I'm happy that we can talk about how we do the work as a team rather than just do project or status updates. Another little anecdote that I'll mention to you is that typically when I would go on vacation, I would spend the time before I went on vacation about a day or so kind of understanding where everything was at, where all the tasks were at, where we were at with everything, listing out what I thought I wanted the team to focus on while I was gone, and I would create these multi-page while Wes is gone worksheets. The most recent vacation that I took, which was 2 weeks, I did no such thing because all of our work was already out on the board. All the policies were there. Other folks were running the meetings that we talked about that are an important part of our cadence already. So the team was able to just kind of keep trucking right along while I was gone. We also had a staff member that was out unexpectedly for a medical reason, and they were able to focus on their recuperation, and they didn't feel stressed or concerned that something else might get dropped along the way, again, because all the work items were out there and we've already been talking about the work items. I don't know, Kalee, is there anything else you want to add to kind of your experience that you've noticed since we've switched our process to KanBan?
I do feel like we are just collaborating a lot more than we did before, and people are just have an easier time working with each other because we have a better idea of what everything that's going on. And so when someone does need help, there's not as much of that kind of catch-up process going on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see some of that, a little bit of that reflected on this next slide here that has some of the metrics. These are some of the ones that I was looking at. KanBan measures something called lead time, which is really the time for a ticketing system when a ticket comes in to when it's resolved. We reduced our lead time in that area by about 31%. We went from, I think, an 85% confidence level of getting things done in 16 days to getting them done in 11 days. We've had a 21% decrease in the number of cold cases that we have. Kalee touched on earlier the fact that we've created a separate swim lane for some of those more challenging tickets that we've had, that we now give ourselves available capacity to work on those. So that's actually helped us decrease the number of cold cases that we have. And we've had a huge increase in the number of meetings that we have internally and externally with our stakeholders to really make certain that we're collaborating as a team, and that we are working on building the things that are the right things for our stakeholders that are out there. I know one of the things that within the team I heard about as an early concern was, well, we all have very distinct roles. How are we going to help each other out with things? I think the reality that we've all come to is that there are different things that we although we may specialize in different things, there are different ways that we can help each other out. So maybe our developer can help out our systems administration person by writing or improving a PowerShell script would be an example. So there are definitely lots of opportunities for team collaboration that might not have seemed initially obvious if you just looked at everybody's job descriptions. So if you've been intrigued by KanBan and you want to learn more, I've got a few resources out here for you. Plan View has a great KanBan roadmap. It's like 20 pages, but it's very simple steps. Each of the major steps really is only one page, so a really manageable way to look at the method. The official KanBan guide method, which is listed here, is a great one as well. Very graphical, and it has some of the neat items to show you very visually how things fit together. Then there's a link there to the Project Manager's Guide to KanBan, which is from the Canvanize company. And then within the CLC, one of the things that helped us drastically was we did have a team training on the KanBan process, and we took that from Applied Frameworks. This was a paid-for training, but as a manager, it's some of the best money that I think I've ever spent in a very long time. So it was virtual training over 4 days in the mornings, really great class, really put together excellent, very well. So if you think that you might want to get very serious about it and it would be helpful for you to carve out some time and do some serious training on it, I would encourage you to look at the Applied Frameworks KanBan system design training. That's kind of the starting training process. So on behalf of Kalee and myself, we want to encourage you to say that yes, you can KanBan as a team or as an individual. We've done it. We had been not using a process for a formalized process for a decade, and we were able to add this into our system, and we think you can too. You've got our contact information there on this slide. We encourage you to register for the Q&A session, which will be on September 24th, and you can get a link from this slide as well. And then from our website, you'll also be able to grab a copy of these slides if you want to review any of the material yourself later. So we're really looking forward to that Q&A session and hearing what questions that you might have. And so we will say goodbye for now and hopefully talk with you again on September 24th. Bye.